When I made the last video, I hadn't actually seen all of Diane's one. I had nightmares about the Nazis running the world. So if I'd watched the whole video, I don't know how much worse my dreams would have got. I mean, I don't know what is worse. But anyway, it is quite a coincidence how she ends up talking about the Nazis in the second half of her video. Except she talks about them in relation to who? The adult children who've gone no contact, of course. So now that we've all had a break of a few days, let's have a look at the other half of Diane's worst video yet.
So what happens when young people grow up roaming freely in this seemingly friendly yet subversively hostile social media environment, spending years in therapy while doing so? Why, we get the weaponization of therapy speak. Mental health awareness has increased thanks to social media. This is both good and bad. On the one hand, this enables people to more easily assess their own situations.
It's weird that she says this because she's already decided that going to therapy is usually a bad thing, unless it's in these odd few cases that she allows for it. Why would you need to understand the status of your mental health if you're not going to do anything about it?
But on the other hand, the casual misuse of psychological terms is rampant. Labeling people as narcissists, toxic, abusers, bipolar, borderline, and more fosters this culture of superficial therapeutic language that creates a sense of othering.
She makes a good point. Too many people are being diagnosed as having various things just because others don't like them. But Diane doesn't strike me as someone who's concerned about social justice, bearing in mind what she said in her other videos. She doesn't seem to be someone who would be worried about other people being mislabeled. She's concerned about herself being mislabeled, and that's why she starts off with talking about a narcissist being an unfair term. But even if we didn't know all of this, even if she did just seem to make a good point, she quickly ruins it.
Which leads to an overemphasis of personal boundaries at the expense of mutual understanding and connection.
What? Let's listen again.
Which leads to an overemphasis of personal boundaries at the expense of mutual understanding and connection.
How can you overemphasize a personal boundary? Why would you need to emphasize it again if you've already made it clear the first time? Why would it have to be overemphasized, and is that possible? The only reason you would need to emphasize a boundary in strong terms would be because you're not being heard. Overemphasizing a boundary, the only way I can imagine someone could do that would be if they make it clear they have a boundary and then somebody says, okay, got it, no problem, and then they repeat the boundary really loudly. As if the other person's deaf. Otherwise, how can someone overemphasize their boundary? We're all entitled to them. So being clear about them is just going to be helpful, isn't it, to everyone around us? Then everyone understands how we work. And yet for Diane, it's not easier. Being clear about your boundaries is a bad thing, and she thinks people are being too clear about their boundaries. And she thinks that's because of social media.
Which leads to an overemphasis of personal boundaries at the expense of mutual understanding and connection.
How can emphasizing a boundary be at the expense of mutual understanding and connection? So in other words, how can expressing a boundary mean that you're less connected with someone?
At the expense of mutual understanding and connection.
How can that possibly make sense? Expressing your boundaries helps the other person to understand you better. They understand what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And if they know what you're not comfortable with, how on earth can that stop them from being close to you? Surely that's the only way they can be close to you, is for them to understand what you're not comfortable with and respect it. But not in Diane's world. In Diane's world, it seems to me that people are not entitled to express what they're not comfortable with. I almost want to help her a bit, because I don't think she's expressed what she's really getting at very well. I think what she's really getting at is that the boundaries of these people who are spending too long on social media and who are understanding about therapy more, you know, and in her opinion, misusing therapy speak, that those boundaries become more extreme. So, in other words, her child has stopped all contact with her. I think that's what she's trying to say, but calling it an overemphasis of personal boundaries just doesn't make any sense. So let's take the point that I think she's trying to make. The more you understand about therapy in online communities, the more you're going to misuse therapeutic terms. And then the more you do that, the more likely you are to not just have regular boundaries that everyone has, but to actually cut people off. There are people who haven't quite figured out how to set boundaries, and as they first start to understand toxic behavior through what they're learning mostly online, they're starting to realize, okay, this person in my life is treating me like that, and this person is, right, just cut them off, just get away. And that's often the first stage of starting to heal from narcissistic abuse. And as you get better at setting boundaries, you might find that there are people in your life who in the past you would have just cut out, whereas now you're better able to express yourself with. You don't feel afraid of being assertive and of giving them a chance to react, you know, of deciding, well, when I tell them actually I'm not okay with this, this is what I need, this is my boundary, you can see, right, what is their response? Are they somebody who can learn about what's okay with me and what isn't, and they can respect it? Or are they just always going to cross my boundaries even though I keep speaking up? And there will be plenty of people who will respect your boundaries once you express them, and who might not know that some of these things are boundaries until you make it clear that they are. It's possible that her daughter didn't try to set boundaries with her. It's possible that instead she got the sense very early on in life that things had to be as her mum wanted, and quite possibly as her dad wanted. And so she got used to walking on eggshells, and she just carried on that way until she could bear it no longer, and then she wrote that email and cut off from them. That's quite possible too. And it really doesn't matter which she did, because we know enough about Diane now to know that if her daughter had tried to set boundaries, her mother wouldn't have respected them. And I tend to be very careful when I make assumptions, but in this case, I think it's pretty plain that her mother doesn't respect her, that her mother is talking about her in a disrespectful way, that her mother is shaming her in her videos and other people like her, that she's mocking her, she's mocking people like her. And so why would she have respected her boundaries?
In her book, Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up, Abigail Schreier analyzes the potential harms of psychotherapy in detail. In some cases, interventions have led to worse outcomes, like increased depression or drug use.
Gosh, I mean, I dread to think about that book and really what it could be about, because therapy leading someone to depression and increased drug use, that sounds like what's happened is in therapy, they have faced their trauma, and so they have used drugs to try to cope with that trauma they're facing. That suggests that the therapy might be moving too fast for them, that they're not feeling supported enough in therapy. So these are issues with therapy, but the way that she's trying to put this across is that the therapy itself just makes bad things happen to people. It makes them feel bad, rather than your past makes you feel bad when you face it in therapy.
Multiple studies have found a strong link between heavy social media use and increased risk for depression, anxiety, loneliness, and self-harm, even suicidal thoughts.
I mean, I really just can't even understand how she's connecting these things, so I'm going to have to replay this. Okay, yeah, so there is no connection. People getting more depressed and lonely because they're not interacting face to face so much, and because on social media there can be bullying, and there can also be people talking about how amazing their lives are and only painting them in that light so that others feel like they're losers. She's trying to use that data about that to talk about how therapy and discussing therapy online is bad for everyone. So that all these people are feeling more depressed, not because they're not meeting others face to face so much, but because they're discussing narcissism and they're understanding more about therapy, and they're understanding these different terms a bit, possibly not understanding them quite enough because they're mislabeling people. Once again, there is actually a nugget of truth in this, but it's not the nugget of truth that I think Diane wants us to find. It's the, you know, when you first discover that somebody close to you is behaving in an abusive way, and you realize, oh, it's actually not my fault. The way they're behaving really does seem to go along with this pattern of abusive behavior that's being described to me, you know, that I'm starting to learn about. That can be depressing, because instead of feeling all of this shame about being a terrible person yourself, you begin to realize how much you've actually been let down by the people you trusted. You know, very often your parents or one of your parents. You start to realize, wow, they really have treated me pretty badly, actually. And that's very hard to come to terms with. It can be a lot easier to blame yourself and to think, no, my parent wanted the best for me. They loved me. They put me first. They really cared about me. So I must have just been very difficult. So having the education and the courage to see behavior for what it is can lead you to feel very sad and to grieve at first, you know, until you come to terms with it. This doesn't help Diane's point, of course. Her daughter has not gone no contact because the dark forces of the internet have made her depressed after having had this wonderful, happy childhood.
There's also the questionable trend in mental health services of pathologizing normal behaviors and emotions, leading to overdiagnosis and overtreatment that can make healthy individuals perceive themselves as mentally ill.
So this seems to be Diane's way of deciding that her daughter was never unhappy. There was never anything wrong with her. The autism that she claims to have been diagnosed with and the ADHD she claims to have been diagnosed with were invented by a therapist who just wanted her money. And so she didn't miss anything. She was an excellent mother. It's just that all of this is just pretend. And her daughter's had this really great life, but she's been told she's unhappy. It really seems to be easier for her to believe that than to believe that her daughter really does have trauma from her childhood and from growing up with Diane. She's absolutely convinced, and it's that conviction that sets her apart from other people.
We definitely see these social contagions on places like TikTok, where the more extreme your alleged mental illness, the more clicks, likes, and comments you get.
Somebody wrote a comment under one of my videos saying that Diane is doing Olympic standard mental gymnastics to get out of having to feel responsible. And I think this is a great example of that. All of these completely normal people are pretending to be mentally ill for attention on social media. And it doesn't occur to her to think there's anything that doesn't make sense about that. So she's just shot herself in the foot there.
Schreier criticizes our reliance on mental health experts over parental instincts and suggests a more balanced approach. one that encourages self-reliance and resilience in children rather than fostering dependence on therapy and medication.
So you can't be self-reliant if you get therapy. But isn't that the point of therapy? To help people to become more self-reliant. Therapy is for people who haven't previously been given all of the tools they need to accomplish that.
But what we have now, the resulting therapy speak that's everywhere online today, it's creating real divisions in society.
I think she's talking about most people noticing how narcissistic she is.
As people get angrier and more extreme, where do you think that leads? To the precursor of human atrocities, cancel culture, loneliness, isolation, and social contagion.
So the danger of realizing how narcissistic someone is that you decide not to hang out with them anymore. And then you might get lonely. Or more realistically, she's probably only concerned about herself getting lonely.
These four phenomena are deeply intertwined in America today. Together, they are tearing people down and ripping society apart.
Again, so it's not just children who are tearing families apart, it's now anyone who isn't okay with abuse who's tearing society apart.
Cancel culture, which collectively ostracizes individuals or entities for any perceived transgression,
those poor narcissists being ostracized,
leads to deepened feelings of loneliness and isolation. Those targeted by cancel culture can experience severe social exclusion, losing their public platform, personal connections, support networks, and sometimes even their careers. Loneliness and isolation, already significant concerns in our society, are intensified by the fear of being canceled. This fear prompts us to self-censor and withdraw, reducing our sense of community and support.
So when people are offended, narcissists withdraw and they have to censor what they say. People are so unreasonable. Why can't Diane be racist and slag off her daughter without other people having to point out how narcissistic she is?
Which is essential for our well-being. I mean, look at me. I barely post on this channel because the haters are so hateful.
Poor Diane, she barely posts now.
Social contagion, the spread of behaviors, attitudes, and emotions through social networks, plays a huge role in all of this. Negative sentiments and punitive actions multiply rapidly, often without full consideration of context or consequences, which means people spread lies.
So all of this negative talk can spread across social media and it can be picked up on by people who don't think for themselves. Well, there's truth in that, but she's a prime example of this. She's parroting all of this negative stuff she's heard on social media and on perhaps Fox News at night. And then she's just regurgitating all of these talking points. Nothing she says seems to be original. But again, everybody else is doing it. She just keeps projecting. Everybody else is the problem. And it's her serious expression, just looking at her expression. It's almost like there's a wall there. Just behind her eyes, there's this wall that no one will ever be able to get through. All she has to do is listen to her daughter and assume that what her daughter says is not manipulative and it's not a lie and it's not to get attention and it's not something that somebody else has manipulated her daughter to feel, that this is actually how her daughter feels. All she needs to do is just to trust this is really how her daughter feels and her daughter isn't crazy and so she can take it seriously. And therefore she has made mistakes. That's all she has to do. But instead, she just cannot stop blasting her daughter, blasting anyone like her daughter, and just telling us about what a victim she is, how much she's being wronged, and just how wrong the world is in general. The amount of energy behind all her videos, I know for myself how long it can take to edit stuff. And her videos will take longer than mine do to edit, I imagine, because she's got all of these different visual and sound effects going on. She's really put a lot into them. And I mean, I think she enjoys making them, but at the same time, all the energy that goes into all of that, can you imagine if she was only to put that into herself, into daring to look at herself, daring to face her own trauma, which I'm sure is in there, because you don't behave like Diane does if you don't have any trauma.
People spread lies fast. This collective behavior reinforces the cycle of fear and isolation as people become increasingly wary of expressing dissenting views or showing empathy toward the canceled individuals.
This is again so interesting and so helpful of Diane. It appears to be her way of saying that people are afraid to stand up for her antisocial views because others will be appalled.
As people become increasingly wary of expressing dissenting views or showing empathy toward the canceled individuals.
If only she could live in an apartheid system where everyone understood the dangers of ethnic minorities and where children did as they were told and didn't have boundaries even when they grew up, then everything would be okay. People discussing abusive behaviour and how to manage it are not being antisocial. And I think if Diane understood that all of this behaviour she claims to hate is actually her own, is actually evident whenever she speaks, then her world would be so badly shaken up that I think she would have to go straight back into denial again.
Which leads us to stage 4 of this communal cancer. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
This is so true and such a good quote. Isn't it fascinating that she, of all people, is actually using it? What atrocity is her daughter supposed to have committed by not talking to her anymore? And what atrocity are adults around the world supposed to have committed by talking about how they've decided to stop trying to set boundaries that are never effective and to take themselves away from their relationships with their parents?
Voltaire. I said earlier that these 4 phenomena are the precursor to human atrocities. This is not hyperbole. This is history. In Hitler's Germany, Mao's China, and Stalin's Soviet Union, authoritarian regimes exploited social contagion to spread extremist ideologies.
In this video, Diane has been spreading her racist ideology. She's been telling us about people who aren't white, who can't read or write and are therefore stupid and shouldn't be let into university. She's been telling us about a future surgeon from an ethnic minority who had a really bad attitude, wouldn't listen to their professor, and who didn't know body parts and didn't want to learn them. She's asked us to imagine what it would be like if that person was our surgeon in the future. This is the kind of talk that can lead to atrocities.
That your white privilege gives you an unfair advantage and therefore you must kowtow to all of the races.
Making white people feel like victims of ethnic minorities. Encouraging us to generalize based on a single person to a whole race or several races of ethnic minorities. Telling us they are the enemy, telling us we're threatened by them. All of this equates to Nazi propaganda, and she's the one spreading it. I think it's fair to say that Diane would have to have a life-changing experience for there to be any chance of her changing her views. She doesn't warn people they're about to see piles of dead bodies, so I will. Please bear in mind that if you do keep looking at the screen, you're going to see dead bodies during the Nazi era.
Fostering environments where individuals were isolated from dissenting viewpoints and community bonds. The fear of being ostracized or punished drove people to perform and participate in oppressive actions that they wouldn't otherwise, except out of self-preservation.
If you saw her daughter's videos, you'd understand how insane this really is. Her daughter comes across, someone actually phrased it in the comment section under one of my videos, as sweet and fragile. She comes across as someone who is still doing her own healing from the abuse she's experienced. And I've also seen footage of her other daughter, the one that's in a monastery. That was from a video that she has since deleted. And that daughter looks like somebody who's very kind, very gentle, somebody who puts others before herself. How could they or anybody trying to get support online to help them to set boundaries be compared to a dictator who is guilty of mass murder?
These dynamics facilitated the rise of totalitarian movements, leading to widespread human rights violations and atrocities like the Holocaust, the Red Terror, and the Great Purge.
I'm going to carry on in the next video, so if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and I'll see you then.
Darling, you on this phone? Is that what you wanted? Yeah. Are we going to do red light therapy now? Are we going to do that? It's going to be nice, isn't it? See, what do you think? What do you think, Billy?
Little sausage.
Boop, 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 boop. What do you think?
Sweetheart.
Right, should we put the red light on? Okay, darling. We'll put the red light on. What do you think?
Oh, okay, come on, let's put it on.
All right? You think so? Yes, baby? Yeah, okay, you ready for it? We turn it on? Or you want a tummy tickle instead? Is that more fun? A tummy tickle? Isn't that better? That does seem a lot more fun, doesn't it? It's a lot more fun to do that one. Yeah, it's a lot more fun. Lovely. Nice. Nice. Oh, so nice, isn't it? Just so nice. Just so nice. Right, we'll do the red light. Okay, right, you get ready. Get into a nice position, okay? Little cuddly boy. Oh, my cuddly boy. Yes, you are. Oh, someone purring loudly. Someone's purring loudly. That's nice, isn't it? Okay, Billy. Okay? Right, we'll do the red light now. Sweet boy. Oh, my darling. Okay. Okay, sweetheart. Okay. Right. Time for a red light? Just want this to carry on, don't you? Okay. Now, red light time, darling. Okay?
I just don't want this to stop. Oh, it's so good. It's so good, isn't it? It's so nice. Yeah, it is. It's so nice. Okay, darling. Okay, baby. You just don't want it to ever end, do you, baby? So nice, isn't it? So nice.